Yeah, I thought I'd just highlight this tweet from Mati Azamandi, one of our co-hosts of Big Hair News. On the third anniversary of the attacks, I think about how everyone loves our forgiveness, but few understand our anger. And this is something I remember of that day and the weeks afterwards. For example, I was, some friends of mine had also had friends that were associated with the gun club in Dunedin, and I was getting angry that there was this, this place where the shooter hadn't really been excluded from had been included there, and I was angry about that. And they were saying, "Whoa, hang on, our mates aren't going to go shoot up a mosque or anything." And but my anger sort of fueled sort of this this rage that I had that that racists get a free pass often, right? That they don't get called out. But anyway, Mark Dean quotes Bell Hooks. Yeah. Bell Hooks, who passed away recently, actually argues emotional and physical rage, quote, compels me to take a stand, speak out, choose whether I will be complicit or resist. And also just some other news for today, 3 years after. And I feel like the country has sort of like, especially in, I guess, establishment white-centric spaces, moved on, right? And forgotten. It's like I sometimes feel like I want to shake people and be like, 3 years ago, 51 worshippers were killed in Christchurch. Like, have you forgotten, right? When things like this come up. But yeah, a new report out of Australia has found an increase in Islamophobia, and in fact, in New Zealand here, the leader of the Islamic Women's Council is basically has said the same a few weeks back. So again, that sort of adds to this anger of like this feeling that you just want to sort of shake people and sort of just even simply remind them of this attack 3 years ago.
And again, I think we need to acknowledge the fact that we three have no understanding of what it is, absolutely as well. So yeah, so we want to get that out. Stuff. Like, which was what we talked about on AM show this morning. Both Nui and I were like, we cannot in any way speak for these people, but yet the injustices around them, not even, there was a woman I read on Twitter, her brother was killed. She's just trying to get the details of the attack, and for some reason they won't be released to her, and just things like that. Like, how are you supposed to move on if you can't get resolution around that sort of thing? So yeah. There's also these laws coming in, these hate speech laws. But I was reading that Anjan Rahman is cautiously optimistic about what's happening with that, and she's kick-ass. So yeah.
All right, George, let's bring in Olivier.
Changing gears slightly. Olivier Jutel from University of Otago is joining us.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Olivier. We thought we'd invite you on because I guess the Ukrainian situation is something that the war in Ukraine is something that we've been talking about on the show pretty much daily since we started. But then I thought of today and the anniversary of the mosque attacks and this conversation that we've had with people like Tom Much around the neo-Nazi element in Ukrainian politics and the Ukrainian military. And I thought that just to sort of start, I'd ask, I think people would be uncomfortable about the conversation about neo-Nazis in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Because Penny, for example, because this is the sort of Putin line, right? That he's going in there to denazify Ukraine. What would you say to someone? What would you say to the question like, why should we care about neo-Nazis in Ukraine, for example? Why should we be worried about that?
Well, all right. So I think what you've identified, and sorry, is my mic coming through okay?
Yep.
You're good.
Perfect. All right. Listen, actually, I want to, before I jumped in the chat, you guys were, Pat, you were doing a really great job of sort of regrounding the importance of this day and this conversation. And I actually want to express that part of my academic brain is thinking about politics, history, and ideology, because there's a sort of spiritual, tragic like gulf that makes me just not be able to comprehend, what that event was. So if it sort of like seems like really cold and weird to talk about sort of this sort of grand historical perspective, that's like my own sort of personal failings. But I think, George, you've identified something quite important, which is the sort of post 2016, post Brexit conversations that we've had about social media being part of sort of the crisis of democracy, is this notion that certain facts or certain sort of discourses are loaded with Putin sort of diabolical propaganda sort of program and regime that he is just sort of inserted into our discourse to weaken our resolve and to weaken our democracies, and that this was the great lesson of 2016. And I vehemently disagree with the kind of the political significance of that moment, and actually, in fact, what the sort of social media fallout of what actually happened there. But on this question centrally of why we should care about this question, I mean, I think we in New Zealand have a really important role to think about this. One, because we've seen this horrible event that was part of this sort of surging global rise of the kind of international far right, and the perpetrator of this heinous act was a claims. It's not been verified by the intelligence agencies, and I don't know to what extent clarification around the whole crime would ever get to this point, but claims to have gone to Ukraine to train with the Azov battalion, has emblazoned his weapons with the iconography of the Azov battalion. And then, of course, this is all sort of, Time magazine has reported about this. U.S. lawmakers have urged the State Department to take this issue of neo-Nazis in Ukraine seriously. This is back in 2018, 2019, because the Azov battalion has, in fact, boosted his manifesto, right? And when early in the early stages of this war, and the sad reality is that while the neo-Nazi element in the Ukraine is, yes, it's this excuse by Putin. It's really actually interesting thinking about this historical justification that it plays into sort of Russian nationalism about beating the Nazis. And so Russia or Putin's professed, it's obviously hypocritical. It's a prima facie outrageous sort of case for his war of aggression, which should be widely condemned. And I have no reservation in condemning this monstrous undertaking. But it serves as sort of like traditional Russian sense of themselves as like when they fight their enemies, they're always fighting the Nazis because that's what they did in World War II. And lo and behold, right, Putin is now Hitler. So when we are rallying, our side, we sort of, we're always waging World War II. Everybody's always waging World War II. However, yes, neo-Nazi brigades and battalions are a crucial part in fighting what has been an ongoing war in the Eastern autonomous regions, right? They're the radicals that are willing to fight this really ugly war. And one of the lessons of empire, and I can stop here, is that, when America is sending guns to people, they generally have to send it to the radicals because they're the ones that are willing to fight. So we should be doing everything possible right now, in my humble opinion, to come to some sort of diplomatic resolution of this case, because we're talking, New Zealand has already been witness to blowback of the embrace of the neo-Nazi element of the Ukrainian resistance, right? I mean, the NATO websites have been publishing images of fighters with the Ukrainian with the Black Sunrise swastika image, and people have been getting banned on social media for pointing this out. Facebook has made you don't fall within the algorithm, the moderating algorithm if you praise the Azov battalion now. All right. Something is happening here. And I'm ranting, I'll stop.
Yeah, can I just ask, so every society has factions that are abhorrent within it. So why are we focusing on this Do you know what I mean? Like, it just feels like it's sort of, and I know you're not excusing because, as you've said, but like, I don't know, we're focusing on one element of the Ukrainian response, and it just feels a bit to me right now. I don't know. Like, is it not just part of the society that we all have?
Well, look, I mean, I guess as an American, I feel, and as a Kiwi, and again, I feel like as Kiwis, we should care about this because it's sort of like we are one of the things that March 15th did was it sort of threw us into this, global context in which the far right has organized and is has been weaponized and listen, Putin's got neo-Nazis and all manner of bad guys. But
so racist, right? So racist in a lot of Russia.
Of course,
racist,
absolutely. Yeah, yep. But I'd say that we should not be engaged in policies that literally throw open weapons. So, like, that's Ukraine has been flooded with small arms, which is going to create civil unrest, which empowers the most radical side. And again, Zelensky went to the front in 2019 because Zelensky, who I like, he's a likable guy. He went, his presidency was based on engaging in the diplomatic process in Minsk II with Russia. And he went to the Eastern Front, and there's this video of him confronting these militiamen and saying, hey, basically, hey, you MFers, I'm not just some comedian. I'm a serious man. I'm asking you to put down your weapons. We need to get this process going. And he was trolled and threatened. His life was threatened by members of the opposition who were part of the Poroshenko previous regime that had much closer ties to these far-right nationalists. And basically, if Zelensky right now were to do, and actually, leading up the precipitating events to this war, if he were to do the thing that, like me, if waving a magic wand looks like a sensible path that everybody's securities needs could be satisfied, these far-right factions would kill him. Like, they are a serious threat to Ukraine's own ability to maintain, like, the democracy that they have. And that's been a policy that the U.S. and its allies and NATO's have been all too vigorous in, I guess, strengthening these elements that will fight with Russia because they see that as the bigger objective and the bigger enemy. Anyway.
Is him being Jewish a big... Oh, sorry, Pat.
No, I was everyone's jumping in. I was going to jump in as well. Me? What about me? Can I come in? Thanks.
Hey, shout out. I love your Orioles cap, by the way. I'm a huge Orioles fan.
I'm just listening to what, maybe mine's not really the in-depth, detailed journalistic type question, but I'm hearing you speak about things like arming the radicals, especially from the US. And I'm also thinking about the long-term planning of war. I mean, it's the exact story we heard about what happened with Al-Qaeda and stuff. What happened in Afghanistan is that the Americans went in and they armed these militia groups, these radicals, who they ended up being fighting against using the same weapons that they'd armed them with 20 years before. So I'm wondering if anyone's perspective, anyone can jump onto this, about the long-term planning of war. And do you go, what happens in 20 years from now? And the second thing is, before you come back there, OJ, is as someone who works as an academic and obviously someone who works with, and I'm looking at your bio right now, online social movements is one of your areas of expertise. Do you have any comments around Glenn Greenwald's criticisms in the last couple of days of a journalist in the Ukraine because the journalist embedded themselves to do a story with the Azov battalion? Do you know about that story? Do you have any comments on that?
Really quickly, back to Penny's point. I think the tragedy of Zelensky is that the Ukrainian people elected a Russian-speaking Jewish president who came on this platform of let's stop with the kind of the nationalist rhetoric that was represented by the Maidan revolution coup, that moment. And he has been thwarted from doing what would be in the interests of Ukrainian people by the far-right forces in his own country that undermine him and, the NATO American alliance. That's my view of it. And I think, to your point, Pat, about the Afghanistan question, so Glenn Greenwald's been catching a lot of heat because he's said that America is being cynical here in that, frankly, they would like to turn Russia into Afghanistan to bleed the Russians, and who cares about the blowback? And frankly, if it's true that American intelligence had this absolutely right, as they claim, as the media has claimed that they have, which is, took me by surprise, because I generally, that rule that Homer, he's got a card which says do the opposite of what Bart tells you. I generally am that way about like the American defense and intelligence establishment. But so I caught that L, but that they knew this. And Blinken's meeting with Lavrov in February was basically go to hell on NATO and on security concerns. They absolutely precipitated this event and are happy to see it and to bleed Russians and all the rest of it. Now, was Glenn Greenwald criticizing Terrell Starr, or was it Tom? Or, I mean, look, Greenwald is, I don't know. I don't. I agree with him sometimes. I disagree with him other times. I feel like his general thing is to be a libertarian contrarian that will often, his default line is, isn't it interesting how the right is coming together with the new politics? And it's like, well, I don't really see that. But then American liberals are pretty bloodthirsty, So I support a lot of, I suppose, his criticisms of the American liberal media and political establishment. As there's been the last 5 or 6 years where like Putin was the reason that everything went to shit. Like Hillary, that didn't work out because Putin. Everything's Putin. All the impeachments were bullshit. The impeachments did more to embolden the far right in America, in the sense that the liberal intelligentsia and elite, they treat you like trash and are completely crooked and rotten. Those failed impeachments, which were like just a carnival sideshow that amounted to nothing, have had the impact of, I guess, stealing American liberals' resolve to wage war with Russia, which then like is a disaster for the world, is going to create an economic catastrophe that is going to embolden the far right nationalists the world over. Has anyone thought about this? Like this could be worse than the 1970s economic crisis. And the people that are going to profit from it are the Tucker Carlsons and the right-wing guys that Glenn Greenwald sometimes gasses up. So like, I'm ranting again, but I'm pissed, man. I'm pissed. This is a real bummer.
Yeah, and this is the thing too, is like, because you have such a depth of knowledge that the general people just don't have a fucking clue about. So
too online.
I'm like,
too
who
online.
are they? I don't know. So, yeah, no, but that's because you're an academic. That's what you do. But I just find that. Oh, I'm a comedian, so maybe I should take over the world as well. So there we go. Like,
have you seen? There's an amazing bit, George, that you should drop into the chat, which is Zelensky writing to his. I think it's Zelensky doing a stand-up bit after Maidan, the Maidan revolution, and talking. He's doing a joke about how Obama's in charge, and the Banderites, which are the people that worship the Nazi collaborator Stefan Bandera as their national hero, and he's making very funny jokes about how the Banderites are taking over, and every morning we do exercises, and he's like Sieg hailing, like it's hilarious, and it's sort of like he's doing the Putin line, and in his delivery, Penny, is fire. Like from a craft perspective, like it's hilarious.
I've seen him playing the piano with his dick.
That's too much.
I just want to thank you, Dr. Olivier Jutel, of dropping the word Zig Heil into our live stream.
Bleep it. I'm sorry.
When the YouTube algorithm sends its little bots to us, I'm sure it'll see us and say, maybe we won't monetize this one.
Well, they actually already like demonetized you because I was critiquing the Azov Battalion, not praising the Azov Battalion.
True.
Jesus. Yeah.
Anyway, but I think the New Zealand angle here is kind of important. Like, and I think, like that's sort of the weight of our historical responsibility. And I felt George's energy really strong. And what did we do with the fucking Crusaders rugby team? Is we sort of like Iwi-fied through warrior culture this crazy thing. Like, have you been to Maryvale? These people talk about they came on the first 4 ships, right? Like, just you're in Maryvale? You're from Maryvale?
I'm from Maryvale. So yeah. This is the thing. It's not everybody, right? It's fucking not everybody. And so that shit.
Sorry.
Yeah. I went to a nice private girls' school in Christchurch. I'm supposed to be this person but it's not all like that.
But that is deeply in sort of like the Christchurch fabric, is the sort of original colonial settler thing. And if you remember when the Crusader used to come out on the horse with the sword, that score, that Vangelis score, is like from the Christopher Columbus movie, right?
Yeah.
So
I have a show where I took the piss out of the first 4 ships, and I loved it, and it got the biggest laugh. I was like, if you come over on the first one, you go on and on and on and on about it. So yeah,
get their asses.
But it's not even.
But so we did. What do? We were like, okay, but how about if we like this universal warrior culture that manages to fit in Gallipoli and all the kind of like indigenous sort of militarism, and I'm not, but like kind of make it this one project of empire that we are sort of reconciled through Anzac Day. And oh yeah, by the way, you know, you go to Anzac Day service, they'll talk about Afghanistan, they'll talk about Iraq, they'll talk about all of these things that we've been a part of, and we haven't dealt with it. And that's, I think that's a huge tragedy. I think we have a certain burden of being in the crosshairs of this global event to, like, I don't know, think about empire, think about what that does, what it's doing to Ukraine and all that stuff. But yeah, anyway.
Hey, Dr. Olivier Jutel from Otago University. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Hey, great job on Big Harry, and may you prosper, fam.